Welcome back. This is our second session for the class called Jews in Spain before 1492 and after 1492. And today we are going to be learning about the Jews in Spain from after 1492. And we're also welcoming our presenter, Dr. Tato Julia Miran, professor of Spanish at Hope, and she's been there since 2015. And along with her keen interest in Spanish history and all things Spanish, she is a world traveler. And she has visited Russia, Greece, Armenia, the Dominican Republic. And we are so happy to have her back again. We had a very spirited discussion last week and we're expecting the same. So please, let's welcome Tato, our presenter today.
Hi, thank you so much, Kit, and thank you so much, Susan, for having me today again. I do miss traveling. I used to travel a lot, all those places I visited in 2018 and 19, and now I'm stuck in Holland, just virtually visiting places through my books. So today we're going to talk about the Jewish people in Spain. Today's the second session, and I will share my screen with you in just one moment and begin talking about what I prepared for you today. Again, thank you very much for being here. I see so many familiar faces and so many names that I saw last time. Thank you for sticking with this topic. I think it's very important, and I think that it's fascinating to learn about the culture of the Jewish people in the peninsula, in the Iberian Peninsula. Kit, would you mind giving me a thumbs up if you can see my screen, and I will begin my presentation. Wonderful. All right, so my class is titled The Jews in Spain Before and After 1492. As Kit told you all, I am a professor of Spanish at Hope College, and I teach early modern Spanish literature. I have a very big interest in Spanish history because, well, when you teach literature, you kind of get into everything: politics, economy, history, society, everything, really. One presentation that I had in 2016 kind of got me interested into the Spanish minorities, interested in the Spanish minorities of the early modern period. And here we are today talking about the Jews. Today's session 2, and we will focus on 1492 up to now in Spain. And we will talk about the expulsion and the effects of othering in Spain. Last time we talked about the early history of Spain. We talked about the origin of the Jewish communities in the Iberian Peninsula. We talked about the life in the Jewish communities during the Christian, then Muslim, then again Christian Spain. And then we talked about the religious persecutions that went on in Spain for a very long period of time, centuries actually, and kind of the culminating point was 1492. Today we will begin with the year of 1492, and I will outline again the importance of 1492 in the history of Spain. We will discuss the expulsions, because there was not only one expulsion in the Spanish kingdom or empire, but multiple. We will talk about the life of conversos, define what conversos, who and what conversos are, and we will talk about what is known, what is a known term in research as othering, right? It's kind of like discrimination, but it doesn't have to be explicit. It can be an implicit kind of systemic othering of certain group of people. We will also focus on the social, political, and economic impacts of such expulsions and othering, and we will kind of smoothly make our way to today, into today, and see how the Jewish people are doing in Spain now. So let's begin with 1492. Again, this was an important year in the Spanish history. In 1492, multiple things happened in Spain. Some of the things were great, some of the things were not as great, but it has shaped Spain as it is now, the way it is now. and it is a very important part of the history. First and foremost, in 1492, the Spanish grammar book was published for the first time by Antonio Nebrija, and that's the Spanish that we're using now, as I mentioned in the class last week. Another thing that happened in 1492 was Christopher Columbus sailing into the New World and finding in the discovery, well, we say discovery, but it depends on what way you view that. So that started a new period in the Empire of Spain, right? A new period in the Spanish history. Another thing in 1492 that happened that was important for the Spanish people was that the last kingdom of the last Moorish kingdom fell in Granada with the exit of the Moorish king Boabdil from Alhambra. The Spanish crowns were united, several Spanish kingdoms were united, and Christianity became the main religion in Spain. In 1492 also happened to be the expulsions of the Jewish people. So let's focus on the Jewish people. Now, as we talked in the last class, persecution of Jewish people was not something new in Spain. We're used to talking about Spain as this diverse place in the medieval period, and it was very diverse with Christians and Muslims and Jewish people, different religions, right, living together in the communities. But then we talked about how these communities were not really so united. Everyone had its own neighborhood. Everyone had kind of designated it. Yeah, there was cohabitation, right, in the same place, but it wasn't as wonderful and utopian as we would like to think. We talked about several persecutions that led to 1391, which was a big year, a notorious year for the Jewish people in Spain, because there were forced conversions followed by massacres of the Jewish people, and a lot of people forcefully were converted into Christianity. It's something interesting because after the forced conversions to Christianity, a lot of Jewish people thought that, oh, you know what, there is so many similarities, so I can become a Christian but still kind of do follow my religion because there's so many similarities. And in reality, all of the religions have a lot of common points, so you can stick to that common point and profess any religion, if you will. And so many people were not happy with it, and so the decree of Inquisition was issued in 1480. After 1480, this decree of Inquisition, which was directed toward converso people were the converts who converted from Judaism to Christianity. And then the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, these are the kingdoms that were united by the marriage of Queen Queen Isabella, would be Queen Isabel and of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon. So people, these kings thought, you know what, the Inquisition is not enough. We just want to get rid of the Jewish people. And in 1492, there was the decree of expulsion of the Jewish people, which is also known as the Alhambra decree. This was the first time that the Jewish people were kind of expelled from the Spanish peninsula, decreed by the law. So I will read again a small excerpt from that expulsion decree. John Cohen has a very fascinating book written about, it's a compilation of all the historic documents, and the decree is also found in this book. So he says, well, the kings say, the king and queen say, we have been informed of this, and we know of this, meaning that the Jewish people are kind of wreaking havoc in the society. It was part of the propaganda. We know that the true remedy for all this damage and disturbance lay in complexity of prohibiting communication between the said Jews and the Christians and expelling them from all of our kingdoms, and we try to content ourselves with ordering them to leave all of the cities and towns and places of Spain. They were given several months. The decree was issued in March, and they were given until July to leave all of their premises, taking with them whatever they can. So they left, a lot of Jewish people left. There are exaggerated numbers saying that up to 300,000 Jewish people left Spain. I think a more accepted and more objective number of Jewish people leaving Spain after these expulsions were somewhere between 50 to 60,000 Jewish people. One scholar actually mentions that 20% of them came back before 1499, converted into Christianity. So it came back as conversos, and that was allowed. 1499 was the last year that Jewish people or converso people were allowed into Spain. And when I say Spain, this was the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, because that was what was Spain back then. So seeing this in Portugal in 1497, there were forced baptisms. Portugal later annexed to Spain as well. And there were expulsions in 1498 from Navarra. Navarra or Navarre is the northern part of Spain, somewhere here. It was the part of the Kingdom of Basque Country, also annexed to Spain later on. So as you can see, there are a lot of expulsions that happened in different kingdoms that constituted now the Iberian Peninsula, and the Jewish people were forced to leave or become a converso. So where did they go? The migration of the Jewish people was not kind of like a one place to go. Many people went to the northern Africa, African area. A lot of people went to Morocco, to what is now Algiers. A lot of people went to the Ottoman Empire, actually. And as you can see, the yellow lines here, although this is late Ottoman Empire, this was more like 17th century, the 1600s Ottoman Empire. But many of them went to what is now Istanbul, what was then Palestine, and so on. An interesting fact about these migrations, the red lines that you see here were after the expulsions and early years of converso people living in Spain after the expulsions. And the black lines that you see are later migrations. That was, I'll explain the historical significances of these migrations. So what happens in Europe in general? Spain is this great country now that have discovered Americas, and they are kind of rising as a world superpower back at that time, but also is the Ottoman Empire, the greatest foe of the Spanish people at that time and the Christians in Europe in general. What happens is in 1453, the Ottomans get to the Balkans, get to the doors of the Balkans after the fall of Constantinople. Constantinople is what is Istanbul now. In 1453, when they get Constantinople, it was so easy for them to get what is part of Greece right now, well, all Greece, and so on. A greatest point for the Ottoman kind of rule becomes the Constantinople and Saloniki. And Karen has probably visited that place when she was in Greece. The Saloniki or Salonika in Greek was again a very big cultural center of the Ottomans when they conquered the Balkans. When the Jewish people came here, what happened is that the Ottomans were kind of, these are newly conquered areas, right? They need fortification, they need more organization and so on and so forth. So they take the banking because they were very good bankers in Spain. Finances were some of their strongest suit when they were in Spain, and so was the trade. So that is what they take up in the Ottoman Empire, and that is of greatest help of the Ottomans to the Ottomans. So Jewish people become kind of like the crux of the Ottoman rule in a sense, and they help them a lot. I'll give you some citations in a minute, some quotations of the Jewish people writing about the Jews in the Ottoman Empire. But then in Spain, as the life gets worse and worse and worse for converso people because of the Inquisition, Inquisition was a terrible thing that happened to Spain. And it was also, this was a question that we discussed last time. It was not it was not decreed by the Pope. It was the state that was managing the Inquisition. So it kind of had this very free way of doing whatever they want to, with the conversos. But what happened is that once the life became unbearable and the Inquisition was a thing until 1834 in Spain, many people moved to the Low Countries, moved to Portugal and so on. Now you will ask, well, Low Countries were part of Spain, or Portugal was part of Spain. Yes, but not forever, right? They started moving when the Dutch declared independence from the Spanish people. This was in 1648, after 80 years war for the Dutch independence. And then as soon as they were independent, a lot of Jewish people went to what is now Netherlands, and they established themselves in Amsterdam. This was again, this was the biggest kind of community of the Jewish people in Europe. An interesting fact about the Jewish people in Europe, in Western Europe, in Amsterdam, was that they were still truthful to the Spanish rhetoric. We've talked about this pure bloodness, right, being of certain type in Spain. The Jewish people took it with them. Sephardic Jews are the Jews that lived in Spain and Portugal, and there were other types of Jews, depending on where they were coming from, right? So when they went to Amsterdam, they thought that the Sephardic Jews coming from Spain and Portugal were the best kind of Jews to be in Amsterdam. And in their communities, the Ashkenazi Jews were servants. Ashkenazi Jews came from the Middle East and like South Caucasus area in long before. But Ashkenazi Jews were kind of looked at as servants. And because of the skin color difference as well, they were discriminated against. So it was very interesting that they brought this rhetoric from Spain to the Netherlands, and were following what would they call the pure Jewish descendants of de cuatro costados. De cuatro costados basically means that 4 grandparents were pure Jews. So this is an interesting fact about that. So let's look into the lives of the Jewish people in Amsterdam and Constantinople, which were the biggest communities that the Sephardic Jewish people made when they left Spain. Rabbi Kapsali writes about the Jews in Constantinople, saying that God blessed Turkey because of the Jews. The Jews taught the Turks about all the different weapons of war, and through them, the Turks became masters of the whole earth. And the whole earth is, and this is referring before the 17th century, because the Ottoman Empire, at the moment where the Jewish people arrived in the Ottoman Empire, it was part of the, it didn't conquer more of the Balkans and like above the Black Sea area, right? But when the Jewish people came, and with the financial, economic, and military advance of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans reached to the point of Vienna. In the 1600s, they were almost in Vienna. That was where they were repelled. And so the Jewish people say that it was thanks to Jewish people coming to the Ottoman Empire as well. Emmanuel Aboab, I pronounce it in a Spanish way, maybe there is a different way of saying this, pronouncing his name. They said that expulsions from Spain as intended were intended to diffuse, I have a typo here, was intended to diffuse Judaism throughout the world and make it better known to Christians. So there were a lot of Jewish people that believed that by the expulsions of the Jewish people from Spain and Portugal, this was actually a blessing in disguise, because they were able to kind of spread all over the world and spread their creed as well, and were able to make themselves known. Same with Isaac de Castro. He said that all persecutions were sent by God to preserve the separate identity of Israel. There are a lot of writings by Jewish people saying that all of these were done for a reason, and the Jewish people had to be patient before they were brought to Israel. And everyone truly believed this. And this is written in many accounts, in many written accounts, saying that whatever suffering that the Jewish people bore, this was getting them a step closer to Israel. Here is one illustration of the Jewish people coming to the Ottoman Empire, which is now Turkey. Here, after a successful military victory, the Jewish people are offering a prayer to the Turks. And this is kind of the thanking prayer of the Turks to the Jewish people in Constantinople. What you see here is the Jewish synagogue in Amsterdam. It still stands. It was part of the first, it was actually the first Jewish synagogue in Amsterdam, which was built in 1675 after the first conversos moved from Spain to Amsterdam. This was after the Dutch independence in 1648 and the establishment of a prominent Jewish community in Amsterdam. Now let's move back to Spain and see what happens in Spain after all of these expulsions. We talked a little bit about the economy in the previous class. We said that the economy, the damage, the economic damage was not immediately noticed because of the New World. What happens in 1492, again, the year that the Jewish people were expelled from Spain, that same year, the New World was discovered, right? And with more expeditions into the New World, gold and silver deposits were discovered, and they were all being carried into Spain. There were different offices, what we would call offices now, for, that were built in Spain that were overseeing all these trades. Here in this picture, you will see, in a painting, right? You will see Seville, in the 1500s, and it depicts the trading that was happening in coming into Spain from the New World. But what happens when you bring so much money, gold and silver, from another place? It's inevitable. Inflation is going to happen, right? And when you have inflation, what happens is you have richer people getting rich, but richer people will be rich, whatever. But the poorer people are getting poorer, and they're not able to afford a lot of the things that are being sold in Spain. What happens with this inflation is that trade becomes very difficult, because now, a lot of things are being brought into Spain, like potatoes, corn, tomatoes. These were not things before in the European continent, or chocolate, right? These were all brought in and introduced to Europe from the New World. They're brought in and they're being bought. There's high demand for that. There's also a lot of influx of money, of monetary richness, right? Wealth, and things become expensive. And poor people are not able to buy these things, so poor people become desolate, and it definitely impacts the economy and the lifestyle in Spain. And so when poorer people become poorer, then they start moving from villages to cities, because cities have more job opportunities. This is actually very well depicted in literature in Spain of Golden Age. Cervantes, the writer whom I study, Cervantes has a very famous story. It's called Rinconete y Cortadillo. It's about these two people who are scoundrels. They come to Sevilla, and because they don't have money, they don't have anywhere to stay, they just do petty thefts, right? So this is what in reality happens in Spain. Lazarillo de Tormes is another literary depiction of what happens to poor people. And so many people come from villages into the cities, and the cities become the place where there were so many poor people, homeless people. And this in turn brought in a lot of petty crimes. This in turn brought in a lot of economic problems to Spain. And what's more important, depopulated villages. We talk about depopulation, we have to remember that the expulsions of Jews was not the only way that this depopulation happened. There were even grander things that happened in Spain. First, Jewish people were expelled. Second, Moors were expelled, the Muslim people. Third, the Muslim descent people were expelled until the last expulsion from Spain was in 1609 to 1614, where all the Morisco people were converts from Islam to Christianity, they were expulsed. Then also people seeing that there's so many rich things coming, there's so many rich things coming from the New World, a lot of people emigrate into the New World. And so there is huge depopulation happening in the Spanish Peninsula. There are estimates that before 1492, there were about 7 million people living in Spain. And in the peninsula, but then after all these events in 1600s, there were only 6 million people. So 1 million people, that's a huge number. If you think about it, it's only a century, but 1 million people is a huge depopulation. It's a big number that's exiting the peninsula, and obviously all of these people had some jobs, had some roles, so they're kind of leaving all of these things empty. There is no one to fill these spots. Let's not also forget that there were a lot of diseases. There was the plague that also affected Spain. It's in a desperate state, actually. And with urbanization, which I already touched upon, the poor people from the villages were becoming poorer, and the economy in general was suffering greatly. So again, this didn't happen in one day after the Jewish expulsions. This didn't happen in 50 years after many expulsions. This was something that was very gradual, and it was not one thing that affected the Spanish economy. The Spanish economy boomed actually after the expulsions of the Jewish people, because that was exactly when the New World was found or conquered, whatever term you want to use. But it was very short-lived because of all of these things coming to Spain and affecting the Spanish economy. Of course, there were also wars, and the money that was brought into Spain, it was very easily going to all of these soldiers. Let's not forget the war that I just talked about in 1568 to 1648, the 80-year war that was between Netherlands and Spain. Of course, these are all expenses. Spain had a lot of problems with Italy, with Netherlands, with England now, those were wars and wars fought. Spain also fought against the Ottoman Empire in the Battle of Lepanto. So these were marine wars. These were wars that were happening on the ground, everything that you can imagine. So it was a disaster after a disaster after a disaster. And the small great things that were happening were actually adding to the economic disasters. But of course, the 1500s were the years of great bloom of culture and economy and so on. So now let's look into the social life a little bit and political life as well. As you could see from the very small portion of the decree of expulsion that I read, there is a big kind of climate of hatred in Spain. Why was this hatred? There's so many problems that, again, it's not one thing, but there was a huge predilection toward the Christians in Spain. This is coming from the Reconquest period that we talked about in the last session. And this was fortified by more and more Christian unison of different parts and kingdoms of Spain. Of course, the Catholic king's marriage was kind of the point, the zenith of all this Christian zeal, let's call it, and it was very systemic, how the Christians are better people in Spain, and that's how this evangelization kind of project went into the New World, and we can talk about that in a different moment. But yes, so Christianity was the core identity of the Spanish people. Conversos, as we talked about, as we mentioned, conversos were the people who were of Jewish descent and who converted to Christianity, be it forced or voluntary. And othering is when is kind of a better term to replace discrimination. Othering can be unconscious. Othering can be conscious. It's just the way that the society systemically others and creates this separation between us and others. But let's talk about several definitions of who the Spanish people were and who the others were. So let's start with hidalgos. Hidalgo is a very Spanish word. Hidalgo literally means hijo de algo, son of something. Hidalgos were a great part of the medieval Spanish society, and they usually had, here you can see pictures of some Hidalgos, depictions of Hidalgos. So Hidalgos were son of something. That means that they were not noble, but they had something. So usually it was a piece of land that they had. Usually it had some name. Maybe they were sons of soldiers. Maybe they were sons that were part of the court at one point. So Hidalgos had some name to them, and it was important because these Hidalgos could later become soldiers, and soldiers were highly revered in the medieval Spanish society, and everyone wanted to be a soldier, a knight, right? So these are very important in medieval kind of titles. If you all know, Miguel de Cervantes wrote his novel. The first part of the novel was titled El ingenioso Hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha, the ingenious gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha. Hidalgo does not have a direct translation into English. But so this title was kind of getting lost as the Spanish society was evolving. Everything was changing, but people did not like that. People still wanted to stick to their culture, their tradition, and their values. And so this hidalguía, the son of somethingness, was an important part of people's identities. Hidalguía became so obsessively important at some point that people were buying the title of Hidalgo. And so at some point, you couldn't even tell whether someone was actually an Hidalgo or they just created this identity by paying for it, you know? And so because they were, again, traced back to the medieval knighthood. Pure blood. We talked about this as well. This is about being Catholic, pure Catholic, Christian, Spanish, nothing else. And again, the term of de cuatro costados comes in here. Your pure blood, if as de cuatro costados and even more, y más, that every ancestor that you can trace back to is of Spanish, Christian, Catholic descent. That's pure blood. And so there is this researcher, his name is Hilgarth, and he calls this a paranoia, the Spanish paranoia of the golden age of Renaissance and Baroque period, that everyone had to be of pure blood. I referred to this literary work again last time. It was written by Cervantes. It's an entremés, a short interlude to plays where these two people are actually making fun of these people's paranoia of being pure blood, right? You had to be of pure blood, meaning that you could not have any mixed blood in your descent. And these people would go into villages and create this magical play where they would claim that biblical characters are showing up. And if you were of pure blood, you would see them, otherwise no. But obviously no one could see biblical characters because that was all a farce. It was just all a play. But people pretended like they could see it because they were afraid of this revelation that they might not be of pure blood. And then comes the old Christians versus new Christians. Old Christians, again, were people who you could trace back to Christianity, to the Visigothic kingdom, and new Christians were the ones who were converts. So conversos were new Christians, Moriscos were new Christians. Moriscos, again, were the Moors, the people who had Islamic religion before converting to Christianity. New Christians were highly discriminated against, and actually it was considered like, oh, they were not pure Christians, they are not pure blood, and that is what the Inquisition was for. Inquisition got to really bad and ridiculous points, to a point where there is a well-documented case in 1632, a small boy went and told someone that, oh, there were 6 people that were whipping the crucifix, and they were burnt alive in the plaza in Madrid because a small 6-year-old boy said so. But people had come to a point where anything was proof that people were new Christians, they were not Christians, and they were acting under a mask of a Christian, right? So it came to these ridiculous points and Inquisition was becoming very damaging for the society and perpetrating this hatred and othering of anyone and everyone who was not this pure blood old Christian Spanish. If you read any early modern literature from Spain, you can see this reference many times. Cervantes always talks about this in all of his works, almost all of his works. This is very present. In Don Quixote, Sancho Panza talks about how he's an old Christian and how he's of pure blood, and he mentions it several times because he takes part of it. He takes pride of being an old Christian, and also he's scared of the church, right? Everyone was scared of the church because of the Inquisition at the time. Here you can see hidalgos in this picture, and here you can see a depiction of what burning people would look like during the inquisitorial Spain. Let's talk about the society and literature right now. Many of you have read Spanish literature and are well aware of some bright minds in the Spanish literary and cultural world. Spanish Golden Age is my area of expertise, and two of my absolute favorite writers of this age are Luis de Góngora and Francisco de Quevedo. Both of them are brilliant. Góngora is very well known for his Baroque and sophisticated language, and he writes sonnets. You just read those sonnets and you are in awe. The usage of this language and the sophistication, it's so great that to this day, if someone has a beautiful and eloquent Spanish, they would call that person speaking the la lengua gongorina, no, the Góngora language, because Góngora had such a great way with the pen and language. Francisco de Quevedo, he was also wonderful, one of my absolute favorite writers as well. And Quevedo was the master of satire and mocking. He wrote so many great works. He actually was not just a poet, he wrote prose as well, very revered during the time. There is one but, they were rivals. So they were huge rivals. The Golden Age of Spain was this very fascinating period in Spain. This is between 1500 to kind of early 1600s, what we call the Golden Age of Spain. This is when the literature and art and culture, everything flourishes thanks to the money that's flowing in from the New World and all this power that Spain is gaining for a short-lived period. But Francisco de Quevedo lived to see the disillusion of the Spanish kingdom, right? And he created this concept of desengaño. There's no translation in English for this, but desengaño basically means an undeceit. So engaño means deceit, desengaño means undeceit, more or less. We can't translate this concept, but it's a beautiful way of describing of how he was seeing Spain and the fall and decadence of the Spanish economy, culture, and the society because of all these things that I outlined a moment ago. But let's get back to Francisco de Quevedo and Góngora. An interesting fact is that Francisco de Quevedo was a fanatic patriot. He loved Spain. He, as you can see across here, this is at the cross of the Order of Santiago. There are 4 military religious orders to this day in Spain. Order of Santiago was one of them. Order of Santiago was created, I think, into the 12th century, and it was part of the Reconquest kind of order. What does this do? It kind of combines religion and military activities and people who favor, so Order of Santiago and Quevedo, for example, they favor the Christendom, right? And the reconquering of the Spanish lands during the Reconquest. The Order of Santiago is still an order. It doesn't have radical ideas right now, but it was based and it was founded on kind of radical Christian military political ideology, like all orders before. But so Quevedo, Christian, pure blood, what we will call, and a great writer. Góngora is coming from a converso heritage. So Góngora, his ancestors were from Cordoba, and Góngora was known to be of converso heritage. So he had a Jewish heritage. Quevedo hated this about Góngora. First, because they were rivals. They were acting, they were writing, and both of them were celebrated. So both of them hated each other. And the reason that Quevedo, both of them attacked each other, but Quevedo was a little more malicious toward Góngora. I won't say Góngora was a saint, but there was a lot of malice and evil in between these two, and they wrote terrible things about each other. The most famous of all of Quevedo's satiric and mocking works that were directed to Góngora is Érase un hombre a una nariz pegado. There was a man stuck to a nose. I think you all probably had a little moment to read some of it. I won't read the sonnet, but Quevedo is attacking Góngora's heritage through this sonnet. And you can see that the nose is the focus of this work. And of course, if you know the stereotypes, then the Jewish people were known to have a big nose, but this is ridiculous, right? This is kind of the social construct of how you could attack someone because of their appearance. I mentioned Christina Lee's work in the previous session, The Anxiety of Sameness. In this Anxiety of Sameness, Christina Lee outlines how many ways the Jewish people were kind of, or people in general, doesn't have to be of Jewish heritage, people were attacked for having a big nose because it was kind of the point that many people thought that described Jewishness, right? So Quevedo was pretty evil in this sense, attacking Góngora. This is not the only time that Quevedo writes about Góngora. And again, you can see parts of some of his works that are attacking Góngora's identity many times, and in not very nice ways, in very, very brutal ways. But again, Góngora did not accept this without any attacks. He also wrote things about Quevedo, but it wasn't anything that was attacking his heritage or identity. It was just mainly about, like, you're a bad person, your words are like serpents and things like that. An interesting fact of how this anti-Semitism was deeply ingrained in Quevedo, who is a very well-known writer, is that this plaque that you see here says this is where Quevedo lived. In reality, this is in Madrid. This is on Calle Lope de Vega. I won't get too much into literature, but Lope de Vega was another rival, another great writer of the Spanish Golden Age. But anyway, so in this Calle Lope de Vega, which is now central Madrid, used to be kind of the outskirts of Madrid in 1600s, this house belonged to Góngora. What Quevedo did is buy Góngora's apartment at that time, got to send Góngora back to Cordoba because of his heritage again, came into the house, said that it has this awful stench, and ordered to have the furniture burned because he wanted to get rid of this awful stench, right? He wrote a sonnet about it, obviously, and bragged about how he kind of got the house. This was all vile. There was nothing, he didn't have any interest in this apartment. He didn't have any interest in living here. All he wanted to do is to damage the reputation and this kind of to be vengeful of Góngora for being such a great writer, but of Converso descent. So you can still see this here, and it's kind of an interesting story of the Spanish, even literary rivalry. But anyway, so there are so many stories, and I can go on and on and on. And like last time, I want to keep my talk an hour long and not more. So we have time to discuss some of these moments of history in Spain. But let's kind of wrap this up and ending with the end of the religious intolerance. As I mentioned, the Spanish Inquisition lasted until 1834, so almost 4 centuries. That's a very long time, and obviously a lot of people suffered, not only Jewish people, a lot of Christian people suffered too. So in the 19th century, which is the 1800s, Spain had kind of the decadent Spain was already in kind of very, very bad moments of its economic, social, cultural, everything. Everything was kind of bad at that moment. So in the 18th century, this Inquisition was stopped. There were wars all over, independence wars, European wars, everything. It's just war, war, and war that was making Spain less and less powerful. It comes to early 1900s in Morocco and Spain, people started returning, Jewish people started returning. And in Morocco and Spain combined, there were about 6,000 to 7,000 people living in the early 1900s. So they were allowed, not because they were allowed back. The decree, the expulsion decree, was not abolished until 1968. So I have the year here. Yes, 1968, the decree was not abolished, but because there was religious freedom, people were coming back. During the Spanish Civil War, many of you know Francisco Franco. There were already some Jewish people, as I said, 6,000 to 7,000 people probably, but the synagogues closed during the Spanish Civil War. And during the Franco regime, the Second World War was taking place. Spain did not participate in any of the wars, in any of the world wars. But an interesting fact is that although Franco was a nationalist and he was supported by the fascist regime of Germany at that time, Spain became this transferring place from Poland, Germany into the United States most of the time, or to Portugal. Spain actually was kind of a buffer zone, and many Jewish people stayed in Spain during this time. So it wasn't following the fascist propaganda and kind of persecution of the Jewish people, which is kind of nice to think about, that even during Franco time, there weren't, it wasn't awful. So as I said, 1968, this is still during the Franco regime. The Franco regime lasted until 1975. So in 1968, the decree of Alhambra was abolished, and so the Jewish people were officially not expelled from Spain, so people could freely come in without any fear of their Jewish heritage or identity. It was not until 2014 that the Spanish government decreed a citizenship law. The citizenship law was a law that said if you can prove your Sephardic heritage, then you're welcome to Spain. You can be granted automatic citizenship and you do not have to live in Spain. A little more than 130,000 people applied for citizenship, but I think only 1,500 were granted citizenship, because this is not an easy thing to prove, right? You had to know your Sephardic heritage, you had to know Spanish, you have to take a Spanish exam, you have to know Spanish culture and government, just kind of like in the United States when you're taking an exam to become a U.S. national, a U.S. citizen. You have to know English, you have to, you take an English test, politics test, and so on, right? So same thing. Wasn't an easy process, but 1,500 people got citizenship, I think. And as of now, there are a little over 50,000 people, Jewish people, living in Spain. So as of now, there are no persecutions. Jewish people are safe. Spain is a beautiful country. It did have a very controversial history, like every other country in the world. So please do not think that I'm trying to paint Spain in dark colors. No, not at all. There were mistakes in the history, but this is why we're doing this, to learn from history and not to make any mistakes again, hopefully, if we learn, right? To end this, let me remind you that in 2 days, Jewish people across the world are going to start lighting one candle at a time for their Hanukkah celebration. And so are going to do the Spanish Jewish people. And so if there are any of you who have Jewish families or are observing Judaism, happy Hanukkah to you. And it was a pleasure to give this lecture and present the Jewish realities from past and present in Spain. Thank you so much. I'll take questions.